Hello and welcome back to what's going to be a bit of a different video, taking a more in-depth look at Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown, as well as going back and looking at some of the features and cars and things that have been in the previous two Test Drive Unlimited games, so Test Drive Unlimited and Test Drive Unlimited 2, taking a look at some of the different cars, features and other things from the game, discussing which bits I want to see carry forwards and some of the other things I want to see hopefully from the new game. Now that it's been announced, but yeah, going through a few of the details and things we could expect, as well as a few bits that I'd like to see come forward, some of the bits from previous games, and yeah, just a general sort of discussion video on the new game. So I did previously upload a video doing a first sort of impressions of the trailer when it first came up, looking at the cars that were spotted in that, as well as a few other details that were announced during that Nacon stream. But yeah, we're going to split this video up into several sections, so I'm going to start with the cars, because obviously it's a racing game, that's the main point of it, and then the second section will be on some of the other features, and then we'll finally move on to races and events that I would like to see from the game. But yeah, we're going to start with the cars, start with some of the list of stuff we already know, as well as some cars that are in other games developed by the same studio, and some other cars that I'd quite like to see return from previous games, and maybe some other brands and things brought in that haven't been in previously. But yeah, we're going to start with the cars, so that's what we're going to move on to now. So, the cars that we can hopefully see coming to the new game, some that are likely to be there, as well as a few that I just would like to see. So we'll start with the cars that have already been spotted in the trailer. We've obviously got the Lamborghini Diablo, which would be cool because you might remember Lamborghini disappeared from the second TDU game, so that would be quite cool to see them coming back. Obviously not been in a test drive game since 2006, I think the first one came out. We also spotted the Apollo IE in modelling during the, it's not in the actual trailer, but during the stream where it was announced, we spotted an Apollo IE in 3D modelling. There's obviously the Bugatti Chiron, featured quite heavily in the trailer. There's a Koenigsegg mirror, which I think I said was a Pagani Huayra when we took a first look at it, but no, it's a Koenigsegg. There's a Koenigsegg kind of spotted in the background. It's the mirror off that. Basically, they took some shots from different angles of the same garage, and I thought it was shots of more cars, but no, it was the same garage from different angles. So it is in fact a Koenigsegg mirror. We thought it was a Regera as opposed to an Agera, but the mirrors are similar, so it could really be either. But the shape of the overall car looked more like a Regera, so I would say that was that. Also in the streamer 918 was spotted. In several places it was spotted in the trailer. There was a model of it in the background and a picture of it on the wall. There was also a model of a Ferrari 488 and a Dodge Challenger. So those could be seen in the game. It was mentioned that Ferrari, Lamborghini and Bugatti, they were three things that were named, three manufacturers that were named during the stream. So likely we'll see more of those, as well as the 488 in the background. The only other cars that are possibly confirmed are a few of the ones in here in the licensing agreement bit, which was spotted in the bottom of the trailer. So obviously things like Ferrari and some of the brands are spotted, but there's also things like where it says Koenigsegg, it says Regera and Agera. So although only one was spotted in the trailer, both have their rights for the game. So the game has rights to both of those. And there's quite a lot of stuff on Porsche as well, with Carrera, Cayenne, 918 and 911 all in there. So the 911 Carrera could be one car, but they've got rights for both of those names, as well as the Cayenne, the off-roader, obviously. So those are likely to be in the game, as well as the other stuff I mentioned. One other car spotted in the trailer, underneath this, I think it was a 918, we decided this car was at the front. Underneath it you can see the sort of red nose of something interesting. I can't tell what it is, but that was also spotted in the trailer, so whatever that is in the game, as well as the other stuff in the trailer. It's red, we know that. So that's all the cars that were spotted during the trailer. There are some other cars that are quite likely to be in the game, or some of the cars from this list will be quite likely to be in the game. Because if you don't know, the studio that is making Test Drive for Nacon, I think that's the way around it is. Anyway, it's a studio called KT Racing or Kiloton, are making the game, the developers working on the game, and they are also behind a couple of rally games that you might have heard of. So obviously WRC, probably the most famous rally game, well, the official game of the World Rally Championship. They've worked on the last few of those, so I went through some of the cars on WRC 8 to see what was on there. Obviously most of them are just WRC cars, which I think are unlikely to be added, but there is an extra cars section which has a couple of Lancias in, the Fulvia and the Stratos, so hopefully we'll see that, those in the game, as well as some other bits and pieces from WRC 8, which is probably one of the best racing games they've developed, well, out of these two that I'm talking about now, because the other one is V-Rally, which was not a brilliant game. V-Rally 4 was developed by them, but it does have a much longer car list, or there's a longer list of cars that I think would possibly be carried forward. So I will be showing bits and pieces on screen now of the cars that I spotted. So the first thing I went to was some of the normal rally class cars. It was the first section I looked at, where they have the Alpine A110, which would be cool. It's Kiloton, I think, is a French studio, so we could see a lot of Renaults and things. So the Alpine A110 would be cool. There's also the Mini Cooper, Lancia Fulvia. There's a Mark 1 Escort, a Mark 2 Golf. There was an old-style Renault Clio, a Gen 3 M3, an Abarth 131, a Mark 2 Escort, 911 Safari, which is really cool, the sort of classic 911, built for off-roading. DS3, that seems quite likely to be added. Stratos, which is of course in WRC as well. I think the Fulvia's in this list somewhere as well, so those two cars are in both games. There's also a Citroen Xara, a Renault Megane, and a Abarth Punto, a Renault R5, so the old Renault Turbo, an Opel Manta, Lancia 037, Porsche GT3 RS, which is interesting. Slightly unusual to be in a rally game, so maybe that will come through into Test Drive. There's a Skoda Fabia, Lancia Delta, Mitsubishi Lancer, VW Polo, which again, small hatchbacks, maybe kind of thing you'd start with in the game, and the Modern Mini. There is also a category on V-Rally that has some rather mad hill climb cars, so maybe some of those could be seen coming forward. I mean, they're a bit extreme and a bit mad, so maybe not, but that would be kind of cool. There's also a Buggies section. You might remember in TDU3 there was the buggy you could find from some of the wrecked parts. It was one of the wrecks you could find. So maybe that could come forward, or maybe one of these will be something similar to some of these will be put in as a wreck for us to find again. That would be kind of cool. There is also another category on V-Rally called Extreme Carna Cars, with a CRZ, an MX-5, an Evo, an RX-8, and a Mustang Fastback, which was interesting because that was one of the starter cars in TDU2. And there's also some rallycross cars, an Alpine A310, which would be cool alongside the A110, the classic and the modern one would be cool to see in there. There was a Civic, a Mini Countryman, I think it might actually be the same Mini as I mentioned earlier, a Beetle, a Polo, and a Focus. So there is a very, very long car list on V-Rally, which would be cool to see come through to TDU3, or Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown. So yeah, none of those are confirmed, the ones from WRC or V-Rally. They're just games by the same studio, so there is a possibility some of the cars may be brought across. Obviously it's always more complicated than that with licensing and how the cars are modelled, because the models in V-Rally I did notice weren't brilliant. The two cars in WRC were slightly nicer. It's a slightly newer game, but some of the cars in V-Rally had a more arcadey visual to them. They kind of didn't feel as well modelled, so maybe those won't come through. But either way, they're nice enough, and yeah, like I said, it was a long list of cars, so it would be cool to see those in the game. So now we move on to cars that have not been in anything developed by Kiloton before, and yeah, they aren't in any of their current games and haven't been spotted in the trailer, so these are just cars I would like to see. some of them have been spotted already, actually. I'd like to see quite a lot of Koenigsegg's, which of course one's been spotted in the trailer, but some more would be interesting, as well as maybe some of the older ones. Obviously we had some of the early Koenigseggs in TDU and TDU2. But yeah, generally those kind of more unusual brands is what I'd like to see. It would be cool to see Pagani return and Celine. But yeah, obviously there was all the Zondas in TDU2, and I think there was at least one of them in TDU1. But those games were out long before the Pagani Huayra was a thing, so it'd be cool to see the Huayra. But I wouldn't like them to remove the Zondas. It'd be nice if they kept some of the older cars. I know a lot of games sort of update and remove older stuff, but a nice selection of Zondas and a Huayra would be good. A Celine would be good. We always had the S7, but maybe the S5S Raptor concept that we've got in Horizon would be cool as well. Some other even more unusual makes would be quite nice to see, like Ginetta. I don't know if you remember, there was a Ginetta in the British Cars dealer in TDU2. An Ascari, again in the same dealer. A Morgan would be cool to see added maybe to that same dealer. They haven't been in many games really, and were never in previous test drives. TVR obviously was in the previous games. I think there was only one in TDU2, but a few of those would be cool. And yeah, other things like the Weissman, which was in TDU1, would be nice to see return, obviously. And maybe some of the less unusual supercars. Maybe like the Mclaren and Ford GT. Ford GT I didn't actually spot in the trailer. I thought I did, but it was a 918. So that GT would be cool, as well as the 05. I think I actually prefer the 05. It's just a cooler car. But yeah, some McLarens would be cool. Ferrari we had confirmed, but yeah, no sign of McLaren so far. It would also be nice to see some concept cars return. There weren't really that many of them in TDU2, if any, but in the first test drive there was things like the Shelby Cobra concept, which is a really, really cool thing. If you don't know it, I'll try and find an image of the real life car somewhere to put in the video. But also the VW W12s. We had the Roadster and the Coupe of those in the first game, and those are... It's really a shame VW never made those. Those were amazing looking things. I do really like those. But yeah, I don't think I would have even known about those if I hadn't played the original test drive, which was the only place... I think it's the only game I've ever seen them in. So yeah, some concept cars would be cool like that. And the brand I most want to see come back, which you might have wondered why I didn't mention in the sort of unusual brands section, is Spiker. One of the most important brands, I think, for test drive. They always had some weird and wonderful Spikers. There was a few of them in the first game. Then in the second game, they had the off-road one, which was very, very cool, the concept. I don't think that ever got made. And there was a Zagato one, which I didn't actually like that much, but it was cool to have it in the game. So those would be cool, as well as the more familiar Spiker that you might recognise that was a prize at the casino. Which, again, I'll find an image of this somewhere, because I didn't have the casino installed before, and you can't get stuff added on now. But yeah, that would be cool to see that Spiker, maybe again in the casino, although it would be cool to be able to buy it, but maybe have some other cars in the casino. But yeah, that's kind of the cars I want to see. Spiker's probably the most important one for me, but I'd love to see Koenigsegg, Pagani, those kind of more unusual ones, and some concept cars too. Another thing that might be quite cool to have in the game is bikes. I know this is the cars section, but bikes were often were in TDU1 and 2. I never had them in the first game because I had the PlayStation version, which I don't think had the bikes. But yeah, there's always been bikes alongside the cars in Test Drive. I'm much more into the cars. I'm not really terribly interested in the bikes. Don't know much about bikes, but they've always been a part of Test Drive, so they kind of need to return, I think. Because it's that kind of whole lifestyle feeling of having those fits well, I think, alongside the cars. But yeah, that's kind of what I'd like to see. So yeah, that's the cars we've spotted. A few of the cars from WRC and V-Rally, which hopefully will, some of them, be carried forward, as well as some other cars I'd like to see. But But yeah, generally just sort of unusual supercars we haven't heard of would be nice to see. There are a few more I can think of, actually. There's like the Zenvos, there's that new Dallara supercar, which is kind of cool. But yeah, anything like that, I'd really love to see some more unusual cars added if they can get them with licensing. I'd love to see things like the SLR Mclaren return, but I know that's hard to get licensing for these days. But anyway, I think that kind of covers the cars that we could potentially see in the game, as well as some of the ones I would like to see. I also feel like it goes without saying, with all of these cars mentioned, if they're convertibles, the roof should be able to go up and down, and the indicators and stuff should be functional, as with the previous games, which again has not really been featured in anything else since. So I feel like that's quite an important element to make sure is in the game, which means it's time to move on to taking a look at some of the other features that we could see in the new game. So, on to some other features for Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown. So we already know that it's going to be set in a 1-to-1 scale island. The previous games were, I think, Test Drive Unlimited, the first one was a 1-to-1 scale of a Hawaiian island, then the second one was 1-to-1 Ibiza, and that same Hawaiian island again. So that's always been a huge part of Test Drive, creating these 1-to-1 scale maps. They were the first game to really do these completely open maps, where you could, if you can see somewhere, you can basically drive there. Forza didn't really manage that in the first two Horizons, even the second one almost. But it took them quite a long time to get a map where you could drive anywhere. Obviously we've got the crew that's done it now, but yeah, back when the first game came out, that was really a big thing, so they need to keep that. But yeah, we know there's going to be a 1-to-1 scale island. As I said before, we don't actually know when it's going to be released. It's very early development, so it could be a long way off. And yeah, in the trailer we also saw a house garage. I think it was that, not a showroom, because the cars in it were quite random. They wouldn't be in the same dealer unless there's a new system there. But I think that's a house, which is cool. We want to see the houses come back with the garages, with all your dream cars lined up, where you can arrange them, display them nicely. I love going into the garage and just looking at my cars on there. But yeah, that's what we know so far. I would like to see the Test Drive Unlimited lifestyle feeling returning. So by that I mean showrooms and things you can walk into, go and look around the cars, check out the cars, test drive the cars, houses you can wander around. Obviously there's all the other bits you can go to with your character. But yeah, the showrooms are always great. Having to travel around the map to view the different cars. So please don't make it so we can buy them all in one place like on Forza. I like the idea you have to go and drive to the different dealerships to view the cars and buy them. So yeah, keeping them separate is quite an important part, I think. Just don't change them from the previous games. It's quite easy to do, I would hope. I would hope they'd leave things like that alone. It would be cool to see the used car dealer return as well, and maybe the wrecks from the previous game could appear in there, or in the classic dealer. So obviously we've already found them and restored them in the second game, so continuing forward from that, it would be cool if they then appeared in the used car dealer or the classic car dealer, because we've already gone and found them, and then maybe some new different wrecks for us to go and find around the map would be cool. Or even if it was the same cars again, I wouldn't mind that too much, but it would be cool to have to search for the wrecks again. But yeah, continuing with the showrooms, it was always nice to go and spec your car in the showroom, so choosing the wheels, the paint, the interior is always quite an important part. No games have really done interior customization particularly. I know in the crew you can change the colour and trim, but it's not the same as speccing it at the showroom. And you could also choose wheels in there. I think it's the closest any games come to it. But yeah, that was cool. And then the way they added up the totals, so some of these options were cost options, and then it would kind of tell you how much the car's going to cost, a bit like when you configure them online. It's kind of like an online car configurator, but within a game, which I think was really cool. And yeah, obviously test driving the cars. The game is called Test Drive after all, so that kind of needs to stay in the game, I think. And it gives you a chance to test drive some of the cars you can't necessarily afford yet, which is always very cool. I spent a lot of time going back and test driving the same car that I wanted to own but couldn't afford. And I did quite like how you could spec them before you test drove them, but I kind of feel like maybe you shouldn't be able to do that, so you have to drive it in the dealer spec until you can buy it. But yeah, either way, it was very cool being able to test drive the cars before you can afford them. So it would also be important for test drive to have houses with garages coming back. Like I said with the dealerships, it would be good if they just kind of left that similar to before. Plus the yachts, which were probably my favourite houses, even though I never had enough to buy them back when I played the previous game. And the house customization, a bit that a lot of people forget. You can go in to My House and change the furniture, the walls, the floor, all of that sort of thing, which would be cool. Might be cool to even see some licensed furniture and clothes, which is another thing you can customize, but some licensed stuff rather than the made-up brands they had. But yeah, that was quite a cool element to the game, being able to customize the house and everything as well, which adds to that sort of lifestyle element of test drive. But yeah, as long as the houses aren't like Horizon 4, where they kind of tried to add them, but they're kind of pointless with no interior or garage like on test drive, but you did have the different houses. But yeah, it took them a long time to bring them in, and they still weren't really there. Again, the crew's kind of done it. It has those apartments that you can go around, but all of them are the same. They're copied and pasted around the map. You can't personalise your interior. It's cool being able to wander around and look at your cars, but it was not done as well as it was back in the old test drive games. So I feel like that is quite an important element. Many houses full of garages, full of nice cars, but with that, it would be nice, like with the cars, you start with your basic car and work your way up. It'd be nice if the houses were the same. I don't know if any of you remember the Caravan and the Nissan Hut thing we had in TDU3. So you start with the Caravan with the sort of corrugated iron garage behind it, and when you get your first house, that's your first house in Ibiza, and your first house in Hawaii is the sort of Nissan Hut thing. So starting with a rubbish house, like you start with a rubbish car, is kind of quite an important thing to start like that and work your way up as you progress through the game. One of the things that keeps you coming back and playing is saving up for those nicer houses and nicer cars. So yeah, that kind of has to go along with the something no other game's managed. 14 years after the first game, it was still not there in any other games with the feeling of lifestyle. So yeah, that's the dealerships and houses. I think they're probably the most important lifestyle elements to keep. But there were also things like the casino, which I never had back on the other game. It was an add-on, and now I can't get hold of it. But it was cool to be able to get exclusive prize cars there. The Spiker that I mentioned earlier, that you could win there. It'd be cool if you could just buy the Spiker, but yeah, the casino was an interesting element to have. To me, it's not as important as the houses and garages. Well, houses, garages, and dealerships, obviously that's the main thing, and I never played the casino, so I don't have memories of winning the car on that, but it would be another cool feature to have. I think the clothes shops should probably remain, as well as the hairdressers and the places where you can change your face, the plastic surgery places, which are a bit weird, but yeah. Obviously nowhere near as important as houses and showrooms, but if possible it would be nice to see those kind of things continue. I would hope they would keep those kind of elements similar to the previous game. Then the characters, so I don't mean your own character. Obviously you choose them at the beginning and then you can edit them, which would be cool if that was carried forward. But I mean some of the characters from TDU3, and as this is going to be Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown, some of the characters behind Solar Crown from the second game could be brought forward. I'm not really bothered if they're exactly the same, but some kind of characters and stuff would be good. The original Test Drive never really had that. That was kind of what was missing from that game, I think. But I never played the first one as much as the second one. The second one was really the one I spent a lot of time on, so that's the one I'm more familiar with. I did play both, but the original one less of. So a lot of the elements I'm talking about are TDU2, I guess, but the kind of lifestyle feeling, dealerships, houses, garages, was both games. Some of the other bits I'm going to move on to are only in the first game. So, for example, the rental cars, the V-Rent in the first game, where you could rent higher-end cars to take part in races, especially with some of the weird restrictions in that game. So you needed an American car or a car with stripes. So it was sometimes good to rent a car, complete the race, and then return it, which would be a cool thing to see return. It wasn't in the second game, so I have less hope for that than I do for the dealerships and stuff, but it was a cool element which would be fun to do. I think you actually start there in the first game. You have to rent a car to go to the estate agent and buy a house and do a couple of races before you buy your own car. So that would be cool as well if you start there in TDU3 or Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown, before you have any cars or anything of your own. So that would be kind of cool. Another feature in TDU1 was the car clubs, which kind of fits in the races and events category, so I'll go over that in more detail. But that, as well as the rental cars, would be nice to see return. But yeah, I'll talk about that in a bit more detail in the next section. The only other thing we had in TDU2, I don't think it was in the first game, was the car washes, which weren't really needed, because your cars would get cleaned when you went back to the house anyway. But it was still a sort of one of these add-on type features they wanted to have in the game, fitted with the kind of lifestyle theme, I guess. But another place you could go with your character and take your car to. But yeah, not really a necessary part of the game. They didn't really help with anything. And I'm think it's unlikely they would add that to the new game, but yeah, it's just another one of these elements that would be interesting to see return. But yeah, obviously showrooms and the houses and garages are the most important kind of lifestyle elements, I think. And a bit like with the cars, the kind of unusual brands are what I want to see return more than anything. But yeah, showrooms and houses are kind of the main important things, but some of the other lifestyle elements would be cool to see. But yeah, that's what I want to see from the kind of other features and stuff of the game. But now we should probably move on to the races and events, which is obviously what you're going to be doing with your cars in the new test drive game. So, the races and events we want to see in the new test drive. So in previous games we've had a few things: car delivery missions, races, obviously, things like the police, the car clubs, being able to drive anywhere, everything like that. So yeah, the car delivery, the timed and not timed missions, you had some where it was try and get there in a certain amount of time, which were quite challenging sometimes, and there were some that weren't timed, where it was just a chance to enjoy a car you don't own yet, chance to drive it properly before you can afford it. And those ones were kind of, don't be tempted to push the car and crash, and then you had the timed ones, try and get there as fast as you can. But those kind of missions would be cool, and along with those, the taxi kind of missions, where you have to take somebody from point A to point B, were kind of cool, something slightly different to do. It's always nice to have a variety of challenges and things to do in a game, but some of these sort of, not exactly races, but kind of related challenges were interesting to see, and hopefully things like that return. The races themselves, it would be nice to see a variety of races, time trials, speed traps. Those ones I always really liked, the speed trap challenges. The speed challenges, keep the car over a certain speed for a certain number of points, was always cool. And with the races, it would be nice to see regular ones and the knockout ones. The knockout ones were kind of long, you had to do a large number of laps to knock people out. But they were in both games, so I feel like that should return, as well as a lot of the other race modes. And these were in previous games, so there's no reason why they shouldn't be carried forward. There's always been police in Test Drive. They've not been very interested in chasing you unless you actually crash into them, so they've not really been brilliant. I'm not terribly bothered whether they return or not, but I think if they do bring them back, they should be a bit stricter. They should chase after you if you speed past them or something, because it always took quite a lot to annoy them in the previous games. I know they weren't the main element of the game, so that was kind of why, but I think if they're going to add them, they should be a bit better than they were previously. But yeah. Moving on to something that was only in Test Drive Unlimited, the original one. The car clubs, which never returned in the second game, were kind of interesting, where there's a series of cars that you have to challenge. So you start at the bottom of the club and work your way up, basically. But they had interesting categories. So I think there was a Ford club, there was like a V8 club, a Cars with Stripes club. They were kind of all different slightly odd criteria to get into the different clubs. So you had to buy cars with the different features so that you could complete them all, which is kind of cool. It encourages you to build your car collection a bit more. And yeah, I think that would be interesting to see that return, because it was kind of a shame that was never in Test Drive Unlimited 2. But yeah, all of these things that I'm mentioning from the first game I think are less likely than the things carried forward from the second game. I think they've kind of made it clear it's going to be similar to the second game with the name, Solar Crown and everything like that. They're definitely going for that more than TDU1. So maybe some of the original Test Drive elements are less likely to return than the Test Drive Unlimited 2 stuff. But yeah, it would be cool to see some of that stuff come back. But yeah, obviously no need to do everything. These are just some of the things that I remember enjoying in the previous games. I don't necessarily expect all of this or want all of this. There's certain elements that I want more than others. Yeah, I kind of briefly touched on this earlier, but if you can see somewhere on the map you can drive there as a sort of feature I want to see. That's quite important. Like I said, Forza didn't fully achieve it till Horizon 3, and the crew didn't really achieve it until quite a lot later. And that you could do it in a 1-to-1 scale map. Obviously the crew's trying to do America, so it can't be a 1 scale map, but the fact Test Drive did that and it was large and you could drive anywhere that long ago was pretty amazing, actually. They did that, so that's quite an important thing. And that really would be cool to see. Like I mentioned earlier, they worked on WRC, so the fact you can drive everywhere, and if they brought the WRC handling and physics model and everything in, and you could drive everywhere using that, that would be amazing. There is actually a bit on WRC 8 anyway, where you can test a car, where you drive around. It's like a test area. It's a test map, which kind of feels quite Test Drive to me when you drive around it. I took a Lancia for a quick drive around it before. But it kind of, visually, it looks quite Test Drive, feels quite Test Drive. So if the map looks anything like that, I'll be happy. But obviously, bigger, full island. But yeah, if they move the WRC handling over, that would be brilliant. A driving anywhere game, because obviously the physics in there are dirt and tarmac. And if you can drive anywhere off-road and on-road, that would be perfect, really. It is really nice to drive on there. I haven't driven on there for ages. Picked it up a couple of days ago to film some stuff for this, actually. And yeah, it's so easy to just jump on and drive. And handles a lot better than the previous two, which are slightly weird. I actually prefer them to games like The Crew, I think. I think they handle slightly better than that, but a lot of people think they are very weird physics. It wasn't perfect, I know. It's the car sometimes let go and spun out under braking and stuff. It's a little bit strange compared to other racing games. But yeah, if they corrected that by bringing some of the WRC physics and handling over, that would be perfect. Because obviously that is by the same studio, as I said before, KT Racing or Kiloton, who are working on this. So, that's an end to the races and events section, I think. So, overall, really, the main things I'd like to see, obviously I mentioned loads and loads of stuff there that they obviously can't add all of. Some of the elements would be cool to see come forward, but the most important things for me are the dealerships that you can go into and spec your car, make it how you want it, test drive it, pick it up, and then take it to your house, to your garage. So houses and dealerships are the main things important to that test drive lifestyle feeling, I think. So I'd really like to see those, and the unusual cars, as I mentioned before, particularly the Spiker. That's probably the one I most want to see return, but some of those more unusual makes and concept cars. So I think as long as they've got the dealerships, houses, and more unusual cars from those different brands and concept cars and things, I'll be happy. If they do that on a 1-to-1 scale map, just like the older test drives, I think they'll have made a game that all of us will love, all of us fans of the previous two games. So as long as they can manage to do that, that's fine. The only thing I haven't mentioned is customization and tuning. Tuning was obviously a main part of the game. Both of those would be cool, but I never really spent much time doing that. It's not really an important part of Test Drive, I don't think. It's not like Need for Speed where customization is the main thing. So yeah, as long as they've got dealerships, houses, and the unusual cars, I think they'll have made a very cool game. We already know it's a 1-to-1 scale map, so we don't need to worry about that. And from the trailer, I'm quite hopeful. It kind of felt like it had that test drive lifestyle vibe to it. So as long as it feels like that, and has some of those features and cars in it, I will be quite happy. But yeah, I'm still very excited for this. I know it's a long way off, so try not to get too excited yet. And yeah, hopefully we'll hear more about the new Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown soon. But yeah, otherwise, I hope you've enjoyed a slightly different video, quite a long video in the end, me talking about all the stuff. But yeah, hopefully we see some of these things come forward to the new game. And yeah, I hope you have enjoyed a slightly longer, slightly different video to usual. But yeah, that's going to do it for this sort of discussion on the new Test Drive game. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll be back with the next video very soon.